Okay, so the biopsychosocial assessment is due on Sunday, April 19th at the end of the day. And we are going to have a Zoom meeting to go over any questions you might have the Tuesday before it's due. So that's April the 12th at 7 p.m. And I'm going to upload Zoom information to this page when we get closer to that date. Because of Zoom bombing and other security problems on Zoom, the university's asked us to start using passwords. So I pick a new password every week and do my thing. So the biopsychosocial assessment is really the primary document that social workers use to collect information about consumers and to write it up in a report format that's easy for other providers to read and that documents what the client has reported to them, whether it's in mental health or prisons, it's used across the social work profession. What I want to do is show you first the instructions, which are posted here, and here's the link for submitting your biopsychosocial. You use the master outline that's here, and we'll go over that in a minute. And I have examples of actual cases, an adult sample, a child sample, and an adolescent sample, so that you can see what one looks like and sometimes gives you a help to format it that way. It's expected that you use general APA guidelines, just of 1-inch margins and 12-point font and Times New Roman. But there's no title page. It's not a paper, it's a different kind of document. There's no title page. In the upper left-hand corner, you put the name of the client and the medical record number. Usually you put your name at the end, maybe the date you completed it. But it's single-spaced. So do use the category headers as you go through, and just single space the document. You don't need to double space it. So basically you're going to either do this assessment of somebody as a role play that you can practice with, or you can use characters from a couple of different shows of movies or TV shows. So you can use the Pat Solitano character from Silver Linings Playbook, or Nina Sayers from Black Swan, or any character from the series Shameless. I've looked at all of these, and there's enough information about each of these characters for you to be able to complete a psychosocial of them, even though you're not able to ask any questions. And it's also okay to make up information in a particular category for these fictional characters only. If you're doing it with an actual person, you need to accurately report all of the information that is reported to you or that you observe. So let me go into a master biopsychosocial outline. And many of you are working for organizations that either have their own paper and pen copy where you fill in the blank or check off boxes. Many of you will, particularly working for the counties or state or federal government, will have an online version that you fill out. But this is a master outline in case you're working someplace that doesn't have an outline for a biopsychosocial. So you'll need to have information for all these different areas, particularly for identifying information and presenting problem. So the identifying information you've already practiced through doing the mini mental status. But here is the things you should be able to put on your biopsychosocial when you're reporting out identifying information. If you're using an actual client for this exercise, and even if you're using a volunteer, please change up the identifying information. Some of you live in Stockton. I work in Stockton as well, and I know a large client base. And so one time somebody did this exercise and I happened to know their client because all they did was change the name. So you need to change more than the name, change race, place of residence, legal status, age, change up this identifying information, change up all of these if you want to hide the identity of somebody. You would not do that on an actual biopsychosocial with a client. So this is the presenting problem. Again, you should have all this information with a particular client except certain circumstances. So for instance, if you have somebody who is taken to the emergency room and is incoherent, you're not going to be able to get any kind of information about the onset of their current problems or any of their history. And so even if you don't have that information, you always state that you don't have the information. You don't just omit it. So this way, whoever's reading your report knows that you tried to ask those questions, but you couldn't get the information. So we'll see that in a couple of the examples that we'll look at. Then with personal history, again, you try to get as much information as possible. If you're working with kids, you're going to get from their caregiver, if they're living with the caregiver that has taken care of them since birth, you're going to get pregnancy and birth information and developmental milestones information. Now, if you have a child who is being raised in foster care and the person doesn't have any access to that information, you're not going to have it, but you're going to say, no information available about pregnancy and birth, no information about developmental milestones prior to 2 years old, or whatever the case may be. But this is all important information to have when you look at the whole picture of the person, which is unique to social work. Doctors look at the physiological and physical part of a person. MFT folks are going to look at maybe just the psychological part of the person, but social workers look at all aspects of the person. So it's important to get as much information as you can. So with an adult client, you might not think it's relevant to ask this information. So you can say, you know, pregnancy and birth and developmental information was skipped in this assessment. Again, it's okay if you don't have it. You just have to say why you don't have it. As you get with older people, adolescents through adults, you want to ask about schooling. And then as you get into adults, you want to start asking about relationships, vocation, occupation, military service, legal criminal history, financial, spirituality, religion, or recreational. Now, you might not get to all of these questions, or the person might decline to answer them. That's okay. Just say, client declines to answer any questions about legal criminal history or financial history. Then we get to family history, which is also a very important section. Sometimes you can do a genogram, which is a diagram of the family. You can do that with a client, even if they're the only ones coming in, because a genogram helps set out the types of relationships there are in that person's family of origin. Now, I don't think you've had a class that taught you how to do a genogram, and you won't until August of this year. That'll be in one of those classes. But if you know how to do a genogram, or you've seen one, or you can look one up, how to do one, there's lots of information online about how to do that. Otherwise, you would just answer these patterns. Demographics, you know, of important people in the family. Religion, education, occupation, major illnesses. Did the family function well? Was there chronic legal difficulties, or chronic medical, or chronic addictions, or enduring patterns of behavior? So just 1 or 2 paragraphs is fine about this. Medical history, you get this information by the client's report, or sometimes it's going to be in a record if the client's been in treatment for a long time. With tobacco, alcohol, drug use, I also ask about caffeine use and energy drink use, because those can mimic symptoms of anxiety disorders and change a person's thinking and speech presentation. If this is a significant part of the client's life, you're going to ask for more details. So then you have collected all this information and reported it out. Now you get into problem formulation and diagnostic formulation. So you give a brief recap of the problem, pull together all the details of the difficulties, how the client views it, maybe how you work it, and end with a brief statement of the goals that you all agreed to. And then you finish this up with a full diagnosis, which includes a primary diagnosis, other diagnoses, and V codes. So that's the outline of how to report the information in a biopsychosocial. So let me ask if you have questions about all of this information that you collect from consumers. Again, use these big headers, the bolded headers, to break down the different sections in your report. I'm going to look at a sequence of questions you can ask. I'm going to minimize this document.
Wait, I have a quick question. So do
Sure.
you want it like this, or do you want it like as sentences?
I want it like sentences.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, use these main headings, but then put all this information into sentences.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
That's what
for those of you who don't usually do this, this ends up being pretty short paragraphs.
Yep.
Because, like, you know, you're going to state name, race, and age all in the same sentence. You're going to say, you know, residents, all with who they're living with, and, you know, what their current situation is there. I mean, it ends up being pretty short paragraphs when you cram it all in.
It does.
Okay.
And we're going to look at a couple of examples. This is a different kind of writing from other kinds of writing you've done in your profession in the program. This is very fact-based. It's not fancy. It's not supposed to be frilly. It's just the facts. And I'll show you a couple of ways to report it when we get to one of the examples.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So I want to minimize that and go back to Moodle. And at the very top of the assignment page is this PDF called Diagnostic Interview Script. I'm going to pop up in a new window. This is from a really long book on mental status exams, about 1 inch thick. And it just is really good for asking these questions. So if you're not, it's not all the questions you need to ask in a biopsychosocial, but it's around symptoms and signs that the consumer might be experiencing, and gives you a checkoff, which makes it go quicker. So this will help you with some of the questions that you would ask in a biopsychosocial. So it's just a 2-pager, I think. No, it goes over to a 3rd page and talks about thoughts and behaviors, past trauma, and thoughts of suicide and homicide. So that's just a really useful tool, and I'm going to click back to the main Moodle page.
Val, is that something that you would include in addition to like going through that outline that you had, or would you kind of adopt this into what you have to expand upon the outline? I
would adapt it to the outline. It's a way to ask questions to get you the information that's in the outline.
Okay. Great, thanks.
And it's not complete. It's just about specific types of symptoms. But if you don't know how to ask these questions yet, because you're just now starting to practice, that's at least a little cheat sheet to help you practice.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure. So those are the tools. And then here is, let's look at the adult sample. And I'm going to maximize this so it fills the screen. This is sufficient for what the consumer put. I took out for what the student wrote. I took out the student's name. I have permission to use all these samples, but I anonymize them. Put the client's name, the client's date of birth, written by, and the assessment date. So as Sherry said, here's the short information. You answer about 5 questions in 1 sentence for these first couple of sections. So here's the identifying information, just the facts, and then her appearance, mood, affect, speech, all of that. Oh, this is my this was my comment, great description. Presenting problem can get into a few paragraphs. Talks about her experiences. And when I put words in quotation marks, that means that's what the client actually said. So just reserve those quotation marks if you want to use the client's exact words. And again, my comment here, good description of the presenting problem. So here is somebody who's in her 40s. You're not going to get a whole lot of information about her early development. So here's a paragraph that really talks about her parents and where her children, her siblings are. And this is right into relationship history. So this is somebody that's not going to get the developmental and early developmental history. And here again, just 3 paragraphs around personal history, pretty short. And family history, was not really included. She said there was no genogram and all other information is included in the alternative sections of this assessment and medical report. So it was in a different part of the chart. She did this assessment on what was in front of her. So she just has a little bit of history around of her parents. So if you don't have it, say where it is, or say it was not obtained, and why. So you still have one of my comments in here. She says the client is currently on medication, but you should say what the medication's for, so that you're not trying to have somebody look up something. When somebody looks in a chart, they want to be able to see this information straight up. So again, you can see that it's not long. Here's the problem formulation. So just again, a brief description of the consumer and the main problems that she has. So here's a section where the person made up information. And that's fine. Again, just for this assignment, it's never okay to make up information in a client's actual chart. So here's the description of the client and what they're going to do and primary diagnosis, and there's no secondary diagnosis or V code. And then here's the plan of care with goals. It's always good to write SMART goals. This person didn't, and that's okay in this assignment, but most agencies are going to require you to write very structured, behaviorally structured SMART goals. So this is just an example of what one looks like, and you've also got an example of a child and an adolescent version, and you can write yours on any one. So what questions do you have about this assignment so far?
Do we have to put a diagnosis or?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we just put our speculation into it, or?
No, you use the DSM to match the symptoms the client has reported to the diagnostic category and then to a specific diagnosis. So then that's when it gets really precise in this class. If you you can't use hunches or speculation, you have to give a specific diagnosis, or if they don't meet a specific diagnosis, say that and then say why. They didn't have enough symptoms, or look in the DSM, there can be sections in the DSM under each diagnosis that says this diagnosis might be better accounted for by some other disorder. You also have to consider differential diagnosis, and that's in the big DSM. So yes, you do have to give a specific diagnosis and then some short rationale for why you've used that diagnosis.
Okay, so do I have to narrow it down to one, or like?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so one or two. So a couple of the other, at least one of the other examples has a primary and a secondary diagnosis. The primary diagnosis was PTSD, and the secondary diagnosis was major depressive disorder. And the DSM says you can use both of those diagnoses at the same time, but the primary diagnosis is the one you're providing the most treatment for. And in that case, it was going to be for PTSD.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, that's a really good question, really good question. So I'm gonna take myself out of this document. I've got sticky notes all over my computer screen about what to cover today for all my classes. So these are your tools, and then you can always post more questions on the biopsychosocial assignment questions because I'll answer them there. That's better than emailing me because I'm still getting a high volume of emails. And I think that's all I have to say about this assignment. Any more questions about this one so far?
I have a question.
Sure.
If this was conducted in another language other than English, where do I note that?
I would note that at the very beginning of the interview, just a note right before identifying information. That's a really good point. Say that the interview was conducted in whatever language. And some people sometimes write, the client was offered an interpreter, but the client declined. So that's important to know as well, if somebody declined an interpreter and they're working in a second or third language. So that also would go at the very beginning before identifying information. That's a great point, thank you.
If I speak the language, do I still have to offer an interpreter, or how does that work?
It depends on your agency. If you're fluent in that language, particularly if it's your native language, it's okay to go ahead and use that language with the client. For instance, I speak enough Spanish to get my needs met, but I can't function professionally in Spanish. So I would never try to conduct an interview in Spanish.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, but if you're fluent in a language, particularly some agencies are paying people a stipend on top of their regular pay to speak a different language. And if they're not, you should ask for one. absolutely, you can use it in your own language. You can just say this interview was conducted in whatever language.
Thank you.
Excellent point. I'm going to scroll down to the final assignment, which is a final exam. And it's a 40-question exam that is a combination of vocabulary, multiple choice, short answer, and a case scenario that has a number of questions attached to it. Excuse me. I was trying to figure out how to help out with the weirdness of the times and all the stressors everybody's having. And I have to keep these assignments for this class because they're really important to help you gauge your learning in this class. But what I decided to do was I'm going to post the final exam in a couple of days from now. So right now it's hidden from you. I need to check it and see if I want to update any questions. But I'm going to have it posted up there for a month rather than 1 week.
Woohoo! Thank you.
So, yeah, so you can do it as you go along. But here's the deal. It's got to be your exam. You can't do it together. It's got to be your individual work. And I want you to use your own words in describing definitions and not the textbook description, because you need to get good at using your own words to describe these different phenomena and different symptoms and signs to consumers. So it's going to get posted early this week, and you'll have the month to finish it up. It's due on, when's it due? Sunday, May 3rd at midnight. And if you still need more time, let me know. Okay, don't be a stranger. Let me know ahead of time if you're having some challenges. So any questions so far about the assignments?
Well, I have a question, but it's just like I don't know what I read into the DSM and all that stuff. Is it normal to think that you have one of these diagnoses, or because it's just it just kind of freaks me out at times. I'm just like, oh my God, I have anxiety. I do have this. Do I have this? Do I need help? I don't know. It just freaks me out.
Yes,
Studying
every single
it
one
and
of
all
us.
that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, you end up diagnosing yourself and all your loved ones and friends and enemies. So yeah, it's yeah, that's normal. That's very normal.
And we all need help, women, all of us, regardless of diagnosis or not.
In many ways, in many ways. But yeah, that's normal.
Can I just say that I kind of wish the DSM would start out with the definition of normal? Because
Yeah.
that'd be great, so that we could refer back.
Yeah, I realized after I'd worked in child psychiatry for 4 or 5 years that I didn't know what normal development looked like anymore. I'd kind of forgotten what it was supposed to be. And so I went and hung, I don't have any kids, so I went and hung around a friend that had 3- and 4-year-olds so that I could just kind of see what that looked like. So it is possible to kind of lose your baseline, your understanding of what I don't call it normal, I call it standard baseline behavior is. But yeah, the DSM is a tricky document anyway, and it's become more and more technical every time it gets revised. So you do your best, and you learn this stuff by doing it in the community. So I recommend finding that internship or finding that job that's going to help you do that.
Well, our internships are pretty much on hold right now.
Yeah,
So.
I've been working with Nancy and Shraddha on that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to stop recording.